flower store, I'm quite curious. Do you still remember like the first set of bouquet?
Yeah,
that
like
you were in?
from actually like the first bouquet was like a dozen of flowers, but was actually placed by a friend, because it's like, at the end, like was still like when we were testing really
the
processes,
delivery.
automations, and I just shared first with a friend saying like, hey, we just launched. If anyone wants to order, and back then I think like we had maybe 5 products live on the website versus the 1,000 that we have today.
But how did you feel, or when you were testing, since it was the first order and you said it was complicated? So how did you feel when you got the first order and then you were going to test out your process and how it's going to end up?
Yeah, I still remember like the very beginning because we were operating in Shopify. Every time you will get an order, you will hear like that bell, ding! Like the bling.
Yeah.
And then, it was like every time you hear the bell, you will go see the details, read everything. Okay, now we need this supply. Send someone to Dangwa to buy the things that we need. Prepare the, back then we will still write the orders on the whiteboard. We will write the message by hand. And then, so it was really like, when we launched the company, we were four people, really. So it was really, everything be done like totally by us. And, that's how you start learning, like, okay, we can automate this, we can automate this, and slowly learning.
Yeah, now that we are getting into it, Saul, before we get into the present day flower store, let's go back to the systems when you guys started. Why was Shopify the platform you chose?
Well, because I think like to launch an e-commerce fast is like, I still believe that is the best platform. Like as long as you are selling something that is like relatively standard. Which later on at some point, is like, it turns out also to be the challenge that we were having because, like gifting has so many particularities that even Shopify, like have trouble. You need to start putting so many plugins, etc. So at the beginning was Shopify and Google Sheets. And basically like I remember Zapier was actually like sending the orders, writing them in Google Sheets. That was, back then, that was our system. And I know because I was the one setting it up.
But how difficult was it to do it manually?
Well, at the very beginning, it was, I wouldn't say that it was complicated because the first days, like we were doing 2 orders, 3 orders, 5 orders. So the main limitation was not, like the that system. I remember, like the limitations start coming like when we did, like I still remember the first day that we did 100 orders. And that day, like already, like writing on the whiteboard, etc. We were like, we cannot do the and we started doing like what we call now that the delivery acknowledgement receipt. That is like a paper that when an order arrives gets printed, so already has a part for the florist for them to know what to. So kind of automating that part of when an order arrives, we don't need to write what it is for production to know what they need to produce. So.
Right. So even if it was very manual, did you ever felt like when you were doing that number of orders or those numbers of orders, did you ever felt like, oh my God, this is going to grow. This is going to be big?
Yeah, like I think especially like the first months, I would say like we launched in July and July till that Valentine's, like even Christmas, etc. It was like continuous massive growth. Also the reality, is because we were putting money on paid marketing, so we had made like a decision, we start already with some funds and we are gonna, like go, because we wanted to try, like very fast and hard to see if really like the potential, existed. So like the first months, like I remember the growth was crazy fast, and like it was very normal, like our first years, like 2-3 a.m. every day because it was the only way of catching up with, because it's like the whole day we will be doing operations and doing orders and helping. And then during the night was when we were really, like trying to prepare the content for marketing for tomorrow. And, like these kind of things. We were doing it after 8 p.m. when kind of like the operations was over.
Yeah. With the growing numbers in sales. So how is the system keeping up? Like Shopify, how is it keeping up with your
I wouldn't say
workflow?
it was really keeping up. It was back then, I remember it was always looking for workarounds, like, now we need to do this. Okay, maybe we try like
Something
this, and it was painful, but to me at that point, I was of the opinion, that as long as from a customer they don't realize,
Right.
on the back end we can deal with suffering. Because to me, suffering that comes from growth is a good suffering. It's like you can figure out things while doing some of them. And then, but I remember back then, like also website going down for a few hours, like those kind of things. Every time we will do one change, you will try, because, now we have like a whole set before launching to production and in tech development, you do it in a development environment. Back then, no. Back then, when we will do some change, we will apply directly in the website. We will check if it works. A lot of times it wouldn't work, and a lot of rollbacks. So I think that after 5 months, I did like one hire already for tech. That, because back then I was like, okay, I cannot do this, because I knew that I was my own limitation for tech growth and to automate many things. We needed to bring, like someone with adept, like with skills. But I would say that until this person came, the first month, it was. But I also think that it's good to pass through there, because then you also understand what are the challenges, like firsthand.
I see. Can you tell more about how difficult it is to be utilizing Shopify at first? Like can you tell more our viewers about it, like the process? What were the the pain points and the limitations?
So some of the challenges that we faced, is number one, already like to have different delivery dates with different time frames, and then being able to block some days, because for example, one day we may already be full capacity. We can do those kind of things. I remember that was one challenge, but that one you could fix it more or less with some plugins. The number two, and one of the big challenges that we faced, is that when we launch, because we also launch operations in Cebu and in Davao, but the reality is that because the supply is being done at a local level, like the prices of the flowers in Manila may be different than in supply than in Cebu or in Davao. And also even the products that we offer, because for example, we may have tulips in Manila, but we may not have available in Davao. So then we need to offer different products and different prices at a city level. That was something that Shopify couldn't offer different. And then the number three is that when we had like big campaigns coming, like Valentine's, the reality is that the COGS, like multiply by 5 to 10. So then, our prices need to increase. So then what we need to have is different prices depending on the day that you are going to deliver. But in Shopify, so what I want is that if I'm in December, but you order for today, I want to sell it, let's say, a dozen of roses at 1,499. But if it's for Valentine's, I want to sell it at 2,499. In Shopify, you needed to choose, either you had one price or the other, or you needed to create different products, and then you will block one. But from a customer perspective, it's very complicated. Why this product is not available? I will say that those were the three main limitations that for us. And then also, that it reached one point in terms of orders that when you put together these three challenges, with that you are paying on a per order basis, we were like, when we were spending already over 100,000 pesos on fees a month to Shopify, we were like, with this amount, we can have our tech team and develop a solution that it's really ad hoc for us and fixes these challenges.
All right. So that led you with the decision, like you mentioned earlier, that you've already hired someone to fix that tech infrastructure, right? So what did they implement to improve the system?
Yeah, so actually like our first system was not even the Shopify. Our first system was on the back end, or operation system, a system to have internal visibility on every order that it's entering, what do we need to buy, from our supplies, what productions need to produce, what time frame, when do we need to ship all. So actually our first system was like the operational, like the operational system. And only once that was already working, we decided to migrate from Shopify into our own,
To your own.
front end.
Oh, boss. Deserve mo malaman ng buong kwento niyan.
Huwag kang mag-alala. The full episode is now up on YouTube and Spotify.
Follow us on our social media pages for more updates. This is Benta Bosses by Quotable AI.